Next up, we have Aaron Craig from nVent, who is the Global Marketing Director. And Aaron has a strong aptitude in taking customer-first approach from search through fulfillment to ensure you create a reliable experience for your customers. Today, Aaron will discuss and talk about the digital journey, of course, of nVent, as nVent implement a tool to become more customer-focused, and the importance of a change management throughout that project or that process. So, Aaron, welcome. It's nice to have you here. So the stage is yours.
Hey, thanks, Ralph. I appreciate it, and thanks for for having me on. So good morning and good afternoon to everybody on the call. I am based out of the U.S., so still morning for me. As Ralph said, I'm the marketing director for Hoffman, and when Tacton approached me and asked me to talk about our experience with Tacton CPQ, the lots of topics that we could have talked about here in our journey, but what we decided to go with, and I think was pretty prominent for us, was change management. And both the other speakers today have talked about it to some degree, and it's an important piece of any digital implementation, particularly CPQ. And I think it's one that I really want to dig into and spend some time on, which I will do today, because I think too often companies overlook it, and it just can't be overlooked. And I'm going to talk about some of our experience, because I think, especially in the beginning, I want to say we overlooked it, but we probably didn't spend as much time on it as maybe we should have in the very beginning. So first, I just want to give a little bit overview of the company and who we are. For those of you who attended the Tacton Summit back in the fall, Alexander Vanderweide, who's a VP of Marketing, did speak a little bit about nVent and our journey and more of the benefits. And I'll talk about some of those benefits and how change management realized them here in a few minutes. But first, a little bit about nVent. We are a global company of about $2.2 billion. Enclosures, which is the segment I'm part of, because the Hoffman brand is a part of Enclosures, is about 46% of the revenues, and with about $1 billion coming from Enclosures. And so it's really important, as we looked at CPQ and our digital transformation strategy, that we have a platform that can scale globally. And that was a big piece of our decision making, and also a big piece of change management here. Oops. So who are we in terms of the Enclosures business segment and the nVent Hoffman brand? So we are a leader in the U.S. market for electrical enclosures, and second globally, with about $953 million of revenue. Really a leader in data protection, advanced cooling. We have over 100 million enclosures installed around the world, and we do go through distribution with over 4,000 distribution points. Again, that was another major factor, how we go to market and our routes to market when implementing our CPQ solution. Also, another huge component of change. As you look at these distribution partners who have other lines that they carry, how do we make sure to get them engaged in our system and also really see this new way of doing business, because it is a new way of doing business, and get them to adopt that change. And we'll talk about that here in a few moments. And lastly here, before I get into the change management piece, we have capabilities around the globe, from industrial automation, telecommunications and 5G, data centers, electrical infrastructure, and a variety of different industrial applications in industries such as food and beverage and pharmaceutical. At the end of the day, our products help to protect critical controls and components, and including data. And I think what's interesting about our digital transformation is we are making it easy through a digital transformation for customers to do that, and not just on the front end, which I'll talk about today, but really connecting that front end with the back end as well, and really making this a seamless experience so they can do a better job and our customers can, in regards to making sure they have the right systems, they have the right configurations, the right customizations to do exactly what they need to do to protect their factory and increase their uptime. Okay, so a little bit about our CPQ journey here. And I won't go through this timeline in detail, but our journey started back in 2018. I actually remember it was in November, and I contacted Tacton as we were looking at really transforming our business. And we already had Tacton for an on-premise solution, but that platform, frankly, we hadn't done a very good job of probably maintaining on our end. And it was a platform that we had kind of integrated and homegrown with other systems that we had. And as we were looking to add in channel partners and scale globally as we prepared for acquisitions and things like that, we needed something that we could really scale quite well. And after a RFP process in 2019, we ended up choosing Tacton, and we did go through the RFP process only because that's part of our corporate culture. You know, even though we had a vendor that we were pretty confident with in Tacton, we did go through the RFP process and vetted it out, and which required some extra time in the process, but it's something we had to go through. What we did at the same time, though, is we defined our business requirements, and this is one of the things that I think we did really well. We identified over 140 business requirements cross-functionally, had a large team together. But what we didn't do well, and I'll talk about this, and as we go into the change management piece and kind of steps to be successful, is really communicate that up to leadership and communicate the why and how. And I think that stalled us a little bit as we move forward. And I think really understanding the impact of these business requirements, and frankly, when you have 140 some business requirements that you've identified, and we have to change, and we have to do these, well, how do you do it in a way that is that doesn't get too overwhelming? And I do think there was a time where we looked at this big list of all these business requirements and user stories, and we're using an agile methodology. It got a little overwhelming at times. And so I think we have to manage that. And there are some people in other functions saying, time out, how are we going to do this? And we'll talk about some of those hurdles in a few minutes. And then that brings us to 2020, when we actually developed the business case. We did have a global pandemic that we were working through, but we were able to really, I think, get a really good business case in place. We had those conversations with the right people within our organization, and we were able to sign the contract. And in 2021, in February, we actually launched our first iteration of CPQ to our sales team and one of our first models, and we have a really robust pipeline here as we move forward. So change is hard, but it's also very rewarding. And as some of you on the call are either exploring CPQ or in the process of it right now, how many times have you heard this in your process? What we have today works. Why do we have to have something else? Or we're going to have to change our processes in order to do this. Which, by the way, that's okay. I mean, sometimes it's good to change your processes. It's going to take too much time and rework to implement this platform. What we have, again, it already works today. It's good enough. Why do we need to change? It's too much rework. And technology will change my job. And you're gonna have some falls on the hurdle there, and that's okay. I've had several, but you get back up, you go back to the process, and you say, okay, here's the business case. You got to go back to the business case, and that's why getting that business case in early and understanding the value and the business requirements of how this will transform your business is critical. And you will have success. Don't let the hurdles become a distraction. That's my biggest advice. Expect them, plan for them, because you will have them. You can eliminate them, but you can manage them, and don't let them become a distraction. And we'll talk a little bit more about some ways to do that. So Alex, when he presented back at the fall summit, he talked about these 6 benefits right here, which are still true to this day. And the other presenters today talked about some of these benefits with their own implementations. Now, one of the things Alex didn't get a chance to talk about, though, was really the change management piece, and how, in order to really realize these benefits successfully, you have to really have a good change management process in place. And don't, I guess my biggest advice is, don't think that it's too early to start, because it's not too early to start. As soon as you say the word CPQ, or digital transformation, you should be thinking about change management and how you're going to plan and assess that change. From there, it's communicating that change. We had a couple hurdles in this, and I'll talk about that. Second, implementation. This can be really overwhelming if you don't do these first couple steps right, and you don't have that change management process in place. You haven't established that business case and those business requirements, and you haven't got everybody aligned through communication. And then sustain it and repeat it. And then you'll have success. And then you can really start to realize those benefits, and they become a lot more tangible to your business. And you really start, everybody, not just you because you're the project leader possibly, or main user, but everybody in all different functions, from product management to operations to sales, they're going to start understanding those benefits as well. And most ultimately, and most importantly, your customer. So now I want to walk through the different steps of how, in our experience, we really were able to manage the change. And I'm going to spend some time on this first one because I think it's one of the most important pieces to our transformation. And I'm going to give a couple stories here of how I think we did really well, but how there are some things where we probably could have done a little bit better too, to plan and assess the change. So the first thing here is you have to identify a business champion within the business. You know, I've seen some other businesses now where, now that we've been in our journey, I've been engaged in helping some other businesses along their journey, and they might have an IT person who's more, or a CTO who's more on the technology side, and they're pushing for change, which is great. But then along with that technology partner, a lot of times you have to have somebody in the business, and that was my role. And to really, somebody who understands the market, who understands the customers and all the different stakeholders involved, and understands the impact as you transcend that across your organization and throughout your customers and their journey. And it's really important because you have to have that person driving from the inside. And then align CPQ with your business strategy, which really correlates with this first one here, your business champion. You know, CPQ alone is a strategy, and I've seen this before, where you have this digital transformation strategy, but you have to connect that digital transformation strategy, and CPQ being a main part of it for us, back with the business strategy, because there's other distractions that are getting in the way: mergers and acquisitions, new growth opportunities, a global pandemic, right? All things that we experienced, and it's something that's still a challenge today. I'm not going to sit here and say we have that all figured out, but I do know that if we go back to the strategy, what's in our AOP, what's in our 5-year strategic plan. That's critical. We call this our growth operating system. And we have to make sure that all of this ties back to our growth operating system so that we can align across the organization. And then identifying your business requirements in your roadmap. This is critical. And as soon as you think that you've identified all your requirements and your roadmap's complete, you start to realize that you have something else. So you do have to, and we'll talk about this in implementation, but you do have to be careful of scope creep. And that happened to us a little bit too. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but identify those requirements and prioritize them and make sure you have a really robust roadmap. And then of course, clearly defined roles. For us, what we've done with CPQ is we haven't just taken the models and said, okay, here's our models that we're going to develop and put the rules and logic in. We've really seen this as a transformational exercise where we're also aligning it back with our capacity so that we can make sure, back to our business strategy, make sure that we have reliable lead times. We can make sure that we are aligning to the capacity within our factory so that what we are putting out on for our lead times as we look at our different, we call them product service offerings or service classes, which correspond with lead times. And having all these different functions from manufacturing to sales to product management to marketing to IT is huge. So it's a big cross-functional effort. You have to clearly define those roles. It is so important to articulate the end game. And this goes back to the planning piece where you really have a good business strategy and align it back to your vision. So articulate the end game when you're communicating. This is something where I'll tell one quick story. Very early on when we were communicating this, we were early on still. We didn't have all of our business requirements or our plan or roadmap clearly defined. And this was actually right as we were acquiring Eldon. And one of the things that we went into this, we started articulating the end game, but then things like, well, how are we going to manage this? How are we going? What's the cost? You know, how are we going to align back to the factory? All these other things came up, and they became huge distractions that we had to work through. And one of the things that I learned in this process is, let's take it back to our end vision and say, okay, guys, are we all aligned on the end game? And if we are, then let's work backwards. And these things through our process and our planning, like I said, we use agile methodology. We'll get there and we'll tackle these. But let's make sure we're aligned on this end business goal and where we want to go. And if we are, then those other things, we'll make sure the process is right so we figure those out. So again, don't let those things become a distraction. Plan for them, communicate it, and communicate that end game. And then executive sponsorship. You know, just like earlier when I talked about the business champion, you have to make sure you have your executive leaders all the way to the top on board with this. Otherwise, because of all those hurdles, it's going to get noisier and noisier and noisier. So you have to have somebody at the top really sponsoring this. And then that cross-functional buy-in, very similar. From your product management directors to your operations leads and sales leaders, really have to make sure they understand it. And I will say that even when I thought that I over communicated, I realized I probably didn't communicate enough. And I will say it's best to have these conversations with small groups with the small functional teams, and then you can bring the bigger groups together later. But make sure you, especially as you're starting the rollout, you know, even your business requirement gathering and things like that, do it in small teams first, and then bring the bigger teams together and make sure you align. Implementation. Wow, we're still in it right now. This is a big one, and it can be overwhelming. But follow your process. So we did incorporate the agile methodology, which is something TechCon firmly believes in as well. And that was huge. And it is critical that you're using this methodology where you have your sprints to help keep you on track. And then you have your program increment planning so that you can really understand what are your objectives of this program increment. Otherwise, it's going to get way too big too fast. Then you're going to have scope creep. The other thing we're still actively managing is, making sure that we get the right people to the right meetings, then hold those people accountable if they're not there. And this, I think Thomas said this earlier, CPQ is a journey, and it's not something where you're just going to say, okay, I'm going to do this for a few months and I'm done. This is a huge multi-year commitment, and it can be exhausting at times. So you have to have those right cadences in place to really make sure that that the teams are aligned and on board, and to help, again, minimize those distractions. And along with that, make sure you're having the right stakeholder updates, communicate progress, communicate risk, and that's important throughout the implementation process. We do this. We have actually stakeholder meetings or steering committee meeting every other week, and then we have a monthly executive leadership team meeting every month. They're not long. They're only about 30 minutes. Sometimes don't even go that long. But it's just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and to really help, again, minimize those distractions. Now, just like communication, train and retrain, especially as you start going out to your sales force. We rolled this out, the first model out to our sales force back in February, and it's now May, and we need to do another retraining, because some people, even though we did a ton of training, we had learning management system modules that we did, and the team did a great job with this. We got to constantly keep it in front of them so that they're like, okay, yeah, I get it. And it is an easier system. I mean, it really is, but change is hard. At the same time, by the way, we launched in February a new website. So we launched a new website along with the new CPQ platform, and it's just retraining, and really making sure that they understand the benefits, the system, and the people who are in it have said, oh my goodness, this is so much better. And it doesn't take them that long to get used to it. It's just, spending about 30 minutes to go into it and really understand it. And then develop those knowledge sharing systems, those learning management systems to continue to promote that change. And again, follow the plan. And then lastly here, and before we go into the Q&A, success. What does success look like? Well, I will say this: success should not be measured by the end result in end project. Make sure you have the right KPIs in place to measure success throughout your journey. Your success should not be realized, hey, in 3 years, I'm going to implement 16,000 SKUs into CPQ. Instead, it should be, look at your plan and understand, okay, success looks like I successfully launched and met these KPIs for this model that I launched in CPQ. Okay. Then redefining your culture. And this is something that I would say doesn't stop, right? It's something that you have to continue to do, and continue to reassess your culture and reassess that change that you've implemented. And lastly, we've had a great collaborative partnership with Tacton, and it's not just because I'm on their summit. It's been a great partnership, and something that we've really, I think, has really been instrumental, because they're there for us when we need help and we have challenges, and that's been a great collaborative partnership for us.